Well, folks, I'm back. It's Adrian still, again. This week I wanted to talk about... I saw this video as I was trolling for content, this Tucker Carlson monologue that I think is worth discussing in the context of the larger historical position of the left at this moment, and comparing it to the historical left in general. Maybe I'm off base with this, because I think already it's out of the cultural zeitgeist, and that's another insane thing to me. Just the speed with which things are put out onto the news cycle and then vanish. I mean, like, remember when we were going to go to war with Iran, or when Australia was on fire, or like last week when India and China were going to go to war with each other, or last week when it was discovered that the Milwaukee police were in some way allegedly involved in a human trafficking ring? Whatever ended up happening with any of that? But in any case, I think this one is worth dwelling on. The video is called President Trump's Hope for Re-Election, and it speaks to a language that I think is used very often in creating a sense of fear about the left. The monologue makes a lot of appeals to order and reason, and a lot of the kind of Nixon-era silent majority bullshit about law and order, that kind of shit.
If the president does lose, that would mean that just a few months from now, Joe Biden would become the president. The United States government would fall under the control of the radicals who control Joe Biden, and they will remake the country. An awful lot of people voted for Donald Trump precisely to avoid a moment like the one we're now in. Donald Trump seemed like insurance. And
Tucker tries to create this narrative or paint this picture of the victimized, rube, good-natured, good faith, silent majority, folks who care about, good old American values, in comparison to the rotten, lying, the dark hordes of rioters.
But the administration's main problems were conceptual. Few seemed to understand what was really happening. Only the naive were surprised when Democratic governors immediately used the coronavirus quarantines to punish people who didn't vote for them. Christian churches and small businesses were locked down. Weed shops and abortion clinics stayed open. Most Trump voters seemed not to notice. They accepted the restrictions without question. This was a health crisis, and they wanted to do the right thing. So they obeyed. They cowered in their homes. Republican leaders, meanwhile, were remarkably slow to catch on to what was happening. Some of them aren't very bright, but most just couldn't imagine anyone acting with that level of cynicism and ruthlessness. Their good faith made them vulnerable to their opponents' lies.
And he tries to intimate that the protests that have been happening the past few weeks are not the result of a spontaneous outburst of frustration and anger at a system that seems almost designed to carry out genocide, but in fact a coordinated effort to attack the good, God-fearing Donald Trump voters.
It all happened so fast that it seemed like chaos at the time, but it wasn't chaos. There was design just beneath the surface. In other words, what looked like protests were in fact highly effective attacks on Donald Trump's voters, his power base.
And he plays these clips to illustrate the idea that the mob is coming to your small town, that it's not just happening in the cities. I think we all know what that means. And one day it may come to your Walmart to fuck your ass up.
Okay. Be patient, but I'll let the officers know, okay?
Are you serious? They're on my car! They're on my car! And I got a little girl in the car crying. Are you kidding me?
And to illustrate a state that is seemingly doing nothing, even though, of course, you could just search cop murder, cop riot gear, And I think you'll see a state that is responding. And he plays this clip from Brooklyn showing cops driving by, which his reading of the situation is that they've been muzzled by City Hall. The NYPD hasn't been able to do anything, which again, I think I have stated my argument, which is that they are intentionally not responding to any kind of calls that aren't probably high violence to stoke this feeling, this fear of lawlessness, no order, the rowdy urban youths. And then he makes his call to action to his audience by saying, how would you feel if this were happening in your community? And he also says one of the funniest statements I've ever fucking heard in my life.
How would you feel if you lived there? You'd be very afraid. You'd feel like things were falling apart. More than anything else, you would want someone to restore order. You'd want a leader to take back your neighborhood from armed children, because armed children are far more threatening than even the worst rogue cop, always.
And he begins to make some moral intimations that I think a lot of these, silent majority Trump shithead types agree with, which is that property, buildings and shit are just as valuable and should be concerned for in just the same way as human life. And we need to be protecting our property. And he finally offers up his prescription, which is to call Antifa terrorists, round up their leaders, and frog march them in front of people, make an example out of them for inciting these riots. And so he riles up this base of people who more likely than not have not met someone who has been to one of these protests, or don't live within 50 miles of one, but who nonetheless live in abject fear of a faceless horde of black bloc coming to their home for some reason and destroying it and stealing all their shit, and creates the additional fear that the shit you like, the politics you ascribe to, is going to be attacked. So even though you yourself have no direct relationship to any of this fucking shit, except probably knowing other cops, the future of your country is in danger, and you need to act. And this is a familiar refrain that reminds me, at least, of the Red Scare. And I don't say this to scare Reds, but as the left gains power in America, I think this is something that we are going to have to grapple with. A sense of fear rather than a sense of, derision or ridicule of us that has been more or less the sort of language that's been used for the past few years. And, it's difficult for a stupid motherfucker like myself to really try to offer a prescription to something like that. But if I had to, I think what I would say is that the most important thing to consider is solidarity, right? Both within and without of the left. Building solidarity among your community and among your comrades develops a sense of trust that you are not, hordes baying for the blood of innocent Christian children, but in fact, radicals perhaps for that which actually matters. But there is one thing you can do today to help the left. There's a website called KeyWiki that basically kind of describes itself as like a repository to keep tabs on leftist dissidents or whatever. I have a page on there. It is the website is run by some right-wing crank named Trevor Loudon from like Australia or New Zealand or some shit. Basically all it does is just like scrape Facebook or something. Facebook, different websites for probably buzzwords, keywords, and then adds that to your KeyWiki page, like that's some sort of smoking gun for all your leftist crimes. I want my KeyWiki page to be better. I want it to be updated, and I am going to take the fall. I want you all to talk to Trevor Loudon or get an account on KeyWiki, whatever it takes. I need you to update my fucking page. I want it to say that I am the president of Antifa. And when anyone ever asks you, you need to tell them, I am the president of Antifa. I am going to take the fall for everyone else. I'm willing to do that. You just have to start spreading this rumor. That's all. So let's do it. Let's make me the president of Antifa. Thank you.
Armed children are far more threatening than even the worst rogue cop, always.